Let's look at number 1. Before I reveal the answer, I'm going to copy this code and paste it into Android Studio. I want to show you what kind of error would come out. Now, when you were solving this quiz, you didn't need to use Android Studio. You could have solved it by just looking at the code here and then writing in the answer. So whether or not you use Android Studio is fine with me. To make the code work, I created a new project, and then I modified the activity main layout file so that it would have a bunch of views with these IDs that we're going to be referencing. I'm not even sure what this layout would look like, but I just wanted to put the views in here with the corresponding view ID names. That way my code will work here. So for number 1, I pasted the code here, and I see that there's an error. Android Studio says it cannot resolve the method setText. If you remember from the last video, I mentioned that setText is a TextView method. That means you can only call this method on TextView objects. In this case, we're calling it on nameTextView, and nameTextView was declared to be a view object. We need to change this to be a TextView object. But then we get an error saying that there's incompatible types. A TextView, an object of type TextView is required, but instead it found an object of type view. That's because findViewById returns a view, and this left-hand side requires a text view. That means we have to add this to cast the view returned by findViewById into a text view. Then we can store this whole thing, which is the name text view, into the left-hand side variable. Then the error goes away, and we can set text Laura on this text view. The error is on line 1, so I wrote the correct code right here. The general explanation is that we need to cast this view into a text view and then store that inside a nameTextView variable. That way, we can call nameTextView.setText, which is a TextView method, on the next line of code here. Let's move on to number 2. I'm going to copy this code and put it into Android Studio. Here's the code I pasted in. The first line of code seems to be correct, there's no errors. But the second line has a red underline, and it says there's an incompatible types error. It says a string is required, but instead it found an int. To understand this better, we should look up the method getMaxLines within the TextView documentation. In the TextView documentation, I'm going to search for the getMaxLines method. And here it is. There's no input parameters, and the return value of this method is an integer. So that's why Android Studio was complaining, because this method was returning an integer, but we were trying to store it into a string variable. As a result, I need to change this data type of the variable to be an int. Then the error goes away. So the return value of this method is an integer, so we can store it inside this maxLines variable. There is a warning still remaining, saying that the variable maxLines is never used, but this is just a code snippet. I assume that if this wasn't a regular app, we would actually want to use this variable later. So the error is on line 2, and here's the updated code. The general explanation is that the return value of this method should be an integer. Let's move on to number 3. Here's the code for number 3. I copied and pasted the code for number 3 in Android Studio. There's an error message that says incompatible types. An image view was required, but instead it found a view. This is similar to the error we just saw with the text view. This method returns a view, and on the left-hand side, we're trying to store it inside an image view. So we need to cast this view object into an image view. This is valid because the view with the ID icon actually is an image view, so it's okay to cast it into an image view. Now that the right-hand side evaluates to an image view, we can store that into the variable on the left-hand side. This variable has a data type image view, so now everything matches up, and the error is gone. On the next line, we can call an image view method, setImageResource, onto this icon image view object. There is one remaining error saying that it cannot resolve symbol logo. That's because I just didn't add an image in our app with the name logo. If I added that, then the error would go away. So our code here is correct. Here's the correct code where I cast this view into an image view. Lastly, we have number 4. I pasted the code here in Android Studio, and surprisingly, there's no errors. The code is trying to find a view with the ID title, and that should return a view, and that gets stored in this variable called TextView. TextView has a data type of view, so that matches with the right-hand side, so this whole line of code is correct. On the next line, we're taking this object, which is a view, and we're calling a setVisibility method on it. The method takes in one input parameter, which is view.gone. I can check the documentation to verify why that is. In the documentation for the View class, I can search for the method setVisibility. I can see that setVisibility is a method within the View class. It takes as input an integer that represents the visibility state. The possible visibility values are visible, invisible, and gone. Since setVisibility is a method within the View class, this is a valid call here. There's no need to cast this into a text view because the method that we're calling is a method of the View class. Now, if we were trying to use a text view method, then we would need to cast it to a text view. So for this question, you should put no error because setVisibility is a view method and it's okay to leave it as a view object. These were hard questions. It's okay if you didn't get them correct. In the next task, you'll have a chance to practice this more.